Hello, everyone. Welcome to the AMA with Andrew Hon. He's the Senior Product Manager Experimentation at Tinder. Today he has joined us to talk a little bit about his work and about experimentation, especially in large consumer apps. And we're going to get started just hearing a little bit from Andrew, and then we're going to get some introductory questions to the topic, so everyone understands a little bit about his work and about a little bit about experimentation. And then we're going to get through questions sent by our community members. If throughout the event you have some more questions that you want to ask, go ahead and pop them in the chat section here at YouTube. So let's get started. Andrew, thank you again for joining us today. It's a pleasure to have you one more time doing an event with us. We had a blast when you participated at GrowthHackers Conference last year. And I'd like to get started first by asking you a little bit about your work at Tinder and your background, other experiences that you had, and a little bit about what you're currently doing.
Thanks, Jordana, and thank you everybody for coming. I'm flattered you all want to learn more about experimentation. So to talk more about myself, I'm the Senior PM of Experimentation at Tinder, the dating app that I'm sure you all know about. It's been a very interesting place to work. I came to this role from my last corporate job being in product analytics, where I learned how valuable it was to A/B test every product change. And at Disney Interactive in social games, I built our A/B testing platform for the product managers and other people who needed to run experiments on their feature releases. So I migrated out of an analytics role to the PM role now, doing the same thing, building an A/B testing platform for Tinder, but yeah, from within the PM function. Before I was in social games, I worked in ad tech, in doing campaign management as a marketer. I was very good at that role, and kind of learned how effective it was to A/B test marketing changes. And kind of where I started in my career in college, I was a cognitive neuroscientist. And I did research in a lab, and that's where I kind of built up my scientific acumen and some of the basic kind of data analysis skills that I found useful throughout my career. Anyway, so that's enough about me. Let's get to the questions.
Sure. So just for a little bit of context, I was wondering if experimentation was something that was a process and something that existed in Tinder early on, or what do you know how that process started? If it was from the beginning or later on they incorporated and saw the necessity of using experimentation within Tinder.
Right. So I joined Tinder 3 years ago. When I joined, my role was to build our A/B testing platform from the ground up. From what I learned after joining, we were using an external A/B testing platform for a couple of years that had some limitations, and that's why we wanted to bring things in-house. There was some practice around running experiments. Before my time at Tinder, the company had an experience investing a large chunk of time and effort building a large feature, which ended up not being successful. And I think that plus, just knowing what the general best practice within tech is, kind of created that willingness to invest more into A/B testing, to run experiments on more features to reduce risk. And just do things in a more efficient way.
And currently, do you guys run experimentation throughout the entire funnel, from acquisition down to retention to activation, or is your team more focused on one step of the journey or one specific goal?
My team, with the A/B testing platform, is more focused on post-acquisition. I would say the company as a whole, we we're very fortunate to have a very compelling product that practically sells itself. Word of mouth is really great for Tinder, and so there's a lot more emphasis on activation, retention, etc.
At the moment, then, do you guys with your experimentation? Like, do you want to, for example, monetize more? Do you want to retain more, or is it something that changes quarter to quarter? How do those goals evolve?
Could you repeat the first part of that sentence? I think you cut out.
Yeah, so when you're talking about experimentation throughout the funnel, do you guys have like an example, a goal that stays the same? For example, your team is focused on building a great onboarding or monetizing or retention, for example, like a main goal. Is it something that stays for a long time the same goal, or is it something that changes with your OKRs or with every quarter or every year?
Right. So the company has a sense of what our North Star metrics are, and they're pretty common to consumer apps. Like we care about daily activity, like a conversion kind of engagement metric of people being successful, making matches on Tinder, specifically having conversations, and monetization, obviously. So those metrics are constant. The way that teams set goals specifically, we do follow the OKR process, and each team focuses on different aspects of the product, so they have more local metrics that they're trying to move.
Gotcha.
My team, as a platform team, just tries to facilitate the experiments being run. So
so your teams are running towards different goals. Everyone's attacking a little business problem.
Right. There's teams focused on different parts of the product, and they try to move metrics that relate more to their aspect of the product.
So you mentioned that you guys do have a North Star metric. How do you see that in relation to Tinder? Is it a framework or that you guys use, that you everyone across experimentation is looking at this North Star metric, and which one is it?
Right. So our platform computes about 100 metrics for all experiments every night. And within the report that's generated, we categorize the metrics, and we have a prominent kind of default tab for what we call these core metrics. So everybody sees these North Star metrics for their experiments, and we are working on kind of instituting more of a process where when people publish results, when they draw conclusions from the experiments they've run, that they make sure to always call out the results of the core metrics.
Great. So about this decision of having your own experimentation engine, was it something that started 3 years ago? Did you guys started experimentation before with other alternatives? What was the reasoning behind choosing to make your own solution?
Right. So the third-party solution that we used, I guess, about 5 years ago at this point, had some good uses, but we ran into limitations due to the scale of Tinder's business, as well as a variety of other factors. So when it came time to a couple of years later, the decision was made to invest in an in-house platform, and our platform it does things a lot better in terms of integrating with our internal services, performance, having control over our data, the sensitivity of our data, as well as controlling our costs.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
So it's because it's custom made for your exact needs.
Right.
Nice. And
Yeah, I guess I would also say that the third-party solutions, I think most typically do not deal with customers past a certain size. So the scale of our data was actually bringing down their systems. So they were having trouble practically delivering to us.
Gotcha. And do you have any examples of experiments from your career that you'd like to share, just so, to contextualize people who are not that familiar with experimentation about what is possible to be done, some wins, and some learnings that you got along the way?
Right. So I'd actually frame it as it's almost like what's not possible to run experiments on.
Yeah.
I think there's a lot more potential for people to set up these controlled experiments on things that they might not consider. One example is in the games space, we actually ran experiments to decide what kind of artistic theme to design the game around. Traditionally, these kind of artistic decisions would be driven purely from intuition. What the team was excited about, what they felt was compelling from an artistic vision point of view. We actually ran, what's called a painted door test. We put up ads on Facebook to see what kind of art styles people would click through on. And it wasn't a perfect measure. Nothing's a perfect measure, but it gave an indication of what kind of art styles and what kinds of themes people would find compelling, at least at the top of the funnel. And the decision that came out of that led to the development of a game, $1 million investment, which ended up performing quite well and being profitable.
That's really cool. You have also participated on our GrowthHackers conference. During the conference, you showed a little bit about experiments in activation specifically. And I'm going to paste the link for that. If anyone watching us wants to look more into details into that, I can give you the link in a few minutes. And what about this idea of experimenting with large consumer apps such as Tinder? How do you see that it differs from other industries, from other verticals?
So Tinder is, I've looked up roughly in the top 30 of internet apps or online apps in terms of user volume. So what's different is the scale. Scale is a common theme in my work in data science as well as in product. The scale makes things different. When I was in academia, working in a research lab, people would spend like many months, like possibly years, gathering participants for experiments. And at the result of it, analyzing the data that was collected, they would be happy. They would struggle to find relationships with a statistical significance, p-value of less than 0.05. With these large-scale consumer apps, we can reach p-values 50 times better, p less than 0.001, in a matter of days, not months. So the scale is kind of staggering, and it makes it possible to run experiments to essentially be scientific in a way that's hard to imagine for people who haven't been in this environment.
That's very true. That's very true. Sometimes when you have very little traffic or just a few interactions, it's hard to get a valid conclusion, right? But then you have to go with what you've got. I have a question from Daniel. Does Tinder use the AAR framework or any other? The acquisition, activation, retention, referral, and revenue?
I think we operate by it. I don't know if we explicitly, call out that acronym when we're doing our work, but yeah, I definitely see activity corresponding to each of those letters.
Cool. Erica has just sent a question. What do you think is the best experimentation tool?
So I'm not an expert on the third-party solutions. I think there is good material out there from people who have reviewed and have conducted seminars with representation from the tools. My personal take, having built two platforms from the ground up, is it doesn't have to be that complex, and actually there's a lot of activity to build up an experimentation culture that falls outside of the specific aspects of a tool. Like in terms of like the statistics, that are offered, they don't have to be that complex. The campaign management can be relatively simple with a little bit of forethought in the design of the experiment. Really, yeah, like if you can work directly with a single engineer and get a basic A/B test working. In fact, like one of my first experiments in the tech industry was I set up a multivariate experiment myself, hacking some action script on Flash banners back in the day. Yeah, all I needed was the logs from the click-throughs, and I was able to analyze and optimize the experiment myself.
Right. We do actually in GrowthHackers, we do have an experimentation management tool that's called GrowthHackers Experiments. With experiments, it is a solution that you can customize to a certain point, but yes, you guys Tinder probably would have a lot of data points, so it is a solution for companies that are either starting or scaling an experimentation process, that want to involve the team, that want to have a specific idea backlog that everyone can find in one place, and then manage the experimentation process in itself, have a repository of learnings that you acquire during the use of the product. So I'll paste a link if you guys want to check that out. Meanwhile, let's just carry on and go with a question from Joe Stevenson. Can you tell us a little bit more about how to go using the scientific method to improve a digital product?
Right. So I took some notes beforehand on the scientific method. So I found a nice list of the kind of the general process of the scientific method. So first you ask a question about something you observe. This idea of the question or hypothesis is pretty core. That's why it comes first. Then you do some background research to learn what's already known about the topic. You construct a hypothesis. That hypothesis takes the form of essentially, if we do X, then we expect to see Y. You run the experiment to test the hypothesis. So meaning this, randomized, controlled trial sort of thing. Then you analyze your data, draw conclusions, and the last step is you can communicate the results to others. So that's the scientific process. It applies to all any type of scientific pursuit, and it applies perfectly well to digital products. Just kind of replace, the domain with instead of some natural phenomenon, it's more specifically how people are using your product.
And explain, but it has to be testing a hypothesis that can be validated or not. It has to be possible to either say that this is in relation to an action that you took.
Right. Yeah. One of the things we're working on is to develop more rigor around defining success criteria ahead of the experiment, so that so the hypothesis can be validated or not.
Wonderful. There's a lot of team training around building a good hypothesis as well. So when you create that benchmark about the rigorousness of the scientific method, I think it helps people to actually come up with experiment ideas that can be tested and just go straight to the point for either be validated or remodeled into a new experiment.
Right.
So we have another question from Kate Reed. I'd like to know your thoughts on how to start embracing a culture of experimentation and testing in traditional businesses that wants to shift to more of a data-driven culture.
That's a great question. Something that I've spent a good amount of my career trying to solve. So I jotted down some notes on kind of the key things that I've found useful in my experience. So I would start with high ROI opportunities that are easy to explain. So get people on board doing something simple like copy testing, changing the marketing message on a call to action, or just tweaking the graphic design on conversion buttons, like make the button bigger, make it a more vibrant color, things like that. You should be able to find some quick wins that way. These low hanging fruit, and then you publicize it and make sure you tie it to business value. If you run the experiments, such as on conversion buttons, like that should be an easy story to tell. When you present the results, you can run this game that people in the experimentation community like to do, which is guess the winner. You show the audience what was tested, both the control and the variant, and you have people raise their hands to kind of publicly show what their guess is. And that exercise illustrates how most people will get it wrong sometimes. In particular, people are paying attention. Executives, leaders, people with or what's called the highest paid person's opinion, they will get it wrong as well. So that kind of democratizes the idea of how the empirical reality doesn't care whose opinion it is. Then in terms of kind of really instituting the process, I found it useful to partner with a team who really gets it, and have that team kind of demonstrate the experimental method, do whatever it takes to ensure their success. And then once they are successful, you have the team share their success and process. Ideally, I think it works better when they actually present it themselves. And so that demystifies this process of experimentation. And then you implicitly get their endorsement of it. And that becomes like an important form of social proof that, if this team is successful and people want to be successful like that team, then it's easy to follow. And then when you onboard new experimenters, always make sure that you're addressing any friction points they're having with consulting. If you have a product, make whatever enhancements are necessary just to remove all objections to experimentation.
One of the things about experimentation is that it's not only successes, there are failures as well. And you can learn with the things that you fail with. So it's not actually all lost. You learn something, even if the experiment didn't bring the results that you wanted. And that's something that must be taught across the company so that people don't disengage from putting on ideas by thinking that if the idea fails, then it reflects on them. So it is a little bit about cheerleading, about giving a little bit back for the people who actually brought in the ideas, about the ideas that have worked, but also about bringing a culture that is safe to actually put an idea out there.
Right. Yeah, it's important to reframe "quote unquote" failures as learnings.
Exactly. We do have a few more questions that came in live. One is from Adina Gruya. So Adina is asking, for beginners in CRO and experimentation, what experiments do you recommend focusing on to increase sign-up rate, and how would the process look like?
Increase sign-up rate.
It's a little bit on acquisition more than
Got it. So first, I think the first activity is to understand your conversion funnel. Map it out with your analysts, instrument it. Assuming it's worth the effort of instrumenting if it's an important funnel. Signups are important, so you instrument it, and then look at where the larger drop-off points are, and just come up with ideas. The team should have ideas coming to mind, like already looking at that conversion funnel, about ways to address larger drop-offs. And then it's a matter of implementing the actual experiments. You try out new ideas. Sometimes you take an incremental approach, like, what if we just tweak this, make it a little bit bigger, a little bit something more. And then it's also important to try things kind of out of the box, try things that are completely different, just to see if you're locked into too narrow of a perspective.
Right. And another question from Sonia. Any recommendation on building product dashboards and identifying key metrics?
I'm a big fan of data visualization. When I worked in product analytics, I put a lot of effort into making sure our graphs and charts were clear and easy to understand. That said, it's very easy to overwhelm the consumers of data with too much information. It's important to know what the key metrics are and to keep the focus on them, and make a lot of tough decisions about cutting out dimensions or data points that are secondary to the message that the story that the data is trying to tell. A good amount of design sense helps. So just understanding what's aesthetically pleasing, having an understanding of usability, what people are able to process visually, as well as what's easy to interact with. All of that helps.
Right. And another one from Scott Hurst. With Tinder, how do you launch lots of experiments without doing lots of different releases?
That's a great question. So Tinder is a mobile-first company. Our product, is on iOS and Android, and it is a pretty significant mind shift from the way experiments used to be run on server-side experiences. On the server, it's always easy to push a new change. With mobile apps, all of the builds going out to people's phones have to go through app review processes with the app stores, with Google and with Apple. And the app review process takes a couple of weeks on average or more. So the solution there is what's called feature flags. So it's you set up, sometimes it's called dynamic variables. You set up this system of remotely configuring experiences within the app that are essentially pre-compiled into the releases. So you still have to meet a release train in terms of making the functionality of the feature possible, but the experiments don't necessarily have to go live until you configure that through your central platform. I hope that answers the question.
Right. And next one from Paul Berg. So what does it look like to build out an internal testing platform? How would a company, assuming they have the scale where it makes sense, start something like that?
What does it look like? I think one of the prerequisites is having some established analytics infrastructure. A core piece of an experimentation platform is having integrated reports that are automatically generated. Once you have that, then you work with the engineers building the actual product to implement the different experiences within the product. And then we can get into the technical details about like how you do random assignment. It's pretty common to use a hash function, which offers deterministic assignment in a way that is still random. But there are multiple ways of achieving that random assignment of users into the different variants. You of course you log the assignment event, and that goes into the data pipeline. Then you join it with your metrics. So I mean, those are the basic steps of experimentation.
Cool. And one more from Andrea. Adding to the question by Adina and your response suite, how does one implement incremental changes on or completely new changes on an app? I think this is a hard one.
I mean, yeah, I think that question needs to be clarified. Like, the engineers make changes to what they're building, or sometimes you have things configurable centrally, so that you can make changes without involving code changes.
So she has clarified a bit. How would you know what changes to implement and test before having the new changes released? But before you release, for example, when I think you understood the question like that. Before you release a big change in your product, how do you know what to test? I think you only know after you do.
Okay, yeah. So this idea of feature flags, we have an internal tool that we call levers. It's our internal branding. There are variables that you can centrally configure that remotely affect what happens in the app. And so these variables can be either Booleans like true, false, numbers, or strings. In the simple case, if it's a true, false, this feature flag simply turns on and off a new feature that was introduced into the app. So that's relatively simple. More complex integrations have used the numbers or strings to affect more of a range of experiences that can be possible in the app. So it could be like a number of elements that are shown. You can try any number that makes sense within the app.
Andrea just said that that's what she wanted to know, so that's good. Great. We got her. So I have one from Jason that quite relates to what we're talking about. How do you identify gaps or opportunities to run new experiments in an app?
That's a great question. So yeah, ideas for experiments can come from anywhere, from any function. So it could come from user research. It could come from anybody's intuition, from engineering, from marketing, and definitely from analytics, where you get more data around the story that's being told. And then it's a matter of opportunity sizing. So understanding how many people are affected, estimating the potential lift, the potential benefit that could come from such a change. That that estimate can be informed by prior experience making changes, and then you go from there.
All right. So we have just mentioned a little bit about prioritization. So let's talk a little bit about that. Javier Palma just asked, what methods do you use to prioritize your experiments? Right. There's a lot of ideas, right?
So I'll emphasize again that my team builds the platform. We facilitate, we enable people to run the experiments. We don't act as gatekeepers. We don't decide who gets to run. We don't specifically prioritize specific experiments. That decision is made more on a company level. We do follow the OKR process, objectives and key results. So we're organized into pillars and pods, and the different team structures have their own goals and key results they're trying to reach. And yeah, so the process that I mentioned of opportunity sizing, coming up with ideas, estimating what the benefit is, you get an estimate from engineering about the implementation cost, and then the benefit to cost ratio is your return on interest or return on investment, which you can use to prioritize experiments. And there's always other considerations like strategic, legal, communications, etc. That affect our prioritization.
All right. And one more from Ulysses Elias. What is the main challenge in the experimentation method?
Right. So A/B testing or controlled experiments, they're when you can do it, it's the scientific gold standard. It's what the FDA uses to approve new medicines. Like for instance, vaccines. And when you can do it, it's wonderful. There are limitations that online apps often run into, especially social apps, around measuring the effect on an ecosystem or like a network of users. Oftentimes, the effect of a change isn't immediately observable in the person who is experiencing the change. Sometimes it affects people downstream of that user, people who are connected to them through the network. So there, it can be a bit more tricky to set up experiments. You have to kind of indirectly try several different methods to measure the impact of changes.
Right. We have another question from Pamela Arenguis. She's asking, how are the growth team or teams or experimentation teams composed in terms of roles?
At Tinder, we have, I think, a pretty standard set of tech roles where you have the product manager, you have engineers, you have some designers, analytics, and then a lot of shared resources like in user research and marketing, legal comms, things like that. Mm-hmm.
Right.
I think that's the basics of it.
Yeah, it depends on what you're trying to achieve. So you're going to need resources from different people with different skill sets. Another one from Manoj. How can we have our digital product to be driven by data and experimentation right from the launch? And how can the internal research and development team be aligned to it?
Right. So I think that's a good question. Where you start is this idea of the North Star, like the most important business goal that you have. It takes a lot of work to really narrow down on that. And then once you do understand
your workshop on that.
What's that?
Our next event is a workshop on that, but then I'll let you guys know more a little bit later.
Awesome. Yeah, so attend that workshop. Learn how to identify your North Star. There's a variety of methods to do that. So then once you have it, you figure out how best to instrument and measure it. Sometimes you can't measure it directly, so you figure out some closely related metrics that are easier to measure. And then you prioritize your analytics, building your data pipelines and reports towards what's important, such as top of the funnel, like user acquisition, onboarding, as well as bottom of the funnel, the most important conversion events, typically things that lead to revenue. So that's the general framework.
Mm-hmm. Another question from Pamela. Do you have centralized teams, or every team has tools for I think she wants to know a little bit more about how our team's organized. Do you guys have like a big team that are in charge of everything, or are they separate with different goals, different tools, running different objectives?
So Tinder has a variety of teams for both kind of user-facing product as well as central teams. The the company as a whole has a single experimentation platform, which is what my team is responsible for. And Tinder is essentially our one app. I have heard that at other large tech companies, they will have multiple experimentation platforms, one for each like core product that probably was built with that product. As many as 6 different platforms in one major tech company.
All right. And I just have a final question here, and then I'm going to leave open the comment sections in case anyone has a last question, and then final announcements. So here's the last question for you. How do you see the future of experimentation for consumer apps? Are there any trends to look into?
It's a great question. For consumer apps, successful apps will always kind of face competition, and they will only continue to win if they continue to innovate. And innovation is best performed at scale for established companies when it's supported by rigorous experimentation. And in terms of experimentation as a process and product, the tooling, the understanding of the tooling continues to improve. I think there are a lot of third-party solutions, more and more every day. But in my experience and the way I see it, there seems to be a natural point of scale at which, when your app gets to a certain size, certain number of users, certain amount of traffic, it seems to always make sense to build your A/B testing as an in-house platform for your core product. There's a variety of considerations like the user and data volume, as that affects cost, data sensitivity. Companies, it's good for companies to be masters of their own destiny, and data is kind of a core resource in internet companies. Complexity of integrations, the responsiveness of these tools, having things co-located on the same servers tends to perform better, right, than hopping across the network. So those performance reasons and responsiveness also in terms of whenever there are issues, there's always complexities once people get to more sophisticated integrations, where it's better to have people kind of in-house with the context of the business and the architecture, who are able to address issues as they come up.
All right. There is one more question. Let me just find it so I can pop it up. But if I can find it here in the list, so it is about how does one become a growth hacker, or how does one start a role in experimentation? Is there any guides or any way that you'd recommend for someone to start that career?
So I think there's some skills that are useful for growth hacking. I'd recommend like developing your skills and experience in marketing. As the term implies, hacking some code. You don't have to be like the best engineer, but know how to read and modify code at minimum. Design is always important. So developing your design sense, like figure out what makes for a good user interface. Understand your user's experience, and then obviously your classic product management skills. Jordana, I'm sure you have a lot more
Yeah. So I have a little bit to compliment on that one. So there is lots of literature about that. So there is the Hacking Growth book by Sean Ellis and Morgan Brown, which is a great read for you to understand a little bit about where the term growth hacking came from, what are the myths around it, how the methodology works, some examples of it. Another great book about it is by Stephen Tomke. It's called Experimentation Works. Also filled of great examples and lots of understanding about how the methodology should work, about the scientific method and everything. And then there's also a bunch of other resources from GrowthHackers Community, where people are always sharing cases and discussing ideas. We have our blog and also our university. There's a great course by Sean Ellis that's called the GrowthHackers Masters course. I can put the link here in the chat. And well, stay tuned with GrowthHackers. We're always creating events, and next event, we're still setting on the date, so I don't have a link for that yet, but you're going to learn firsthand that we're doing a little bit of a workshop on how to set your North Star metrics. So stay tuned in our newsletter to make sure that you don't miss that out. Also, final notes here. We are conducting, this is the very last days to answer the state of growth research. We are actually trying to learn a little bit about the entire process and the people and the skills of people working with growth and experimentation. We're going to be asking you about the North Star metrics, and we're going to be building a nice benchmark that we're going to bring for you in a few weeks. So last days to answer that. The link is in the beginning of the chat. And let me just check if there are any more questions. And then, guys, I think we're done with the questions. Andrew, thank you so much for participating with us again. Is there anything else that you'd like to leave as a message for our audience?
Sure. I have a pithy piece of advice that I've given to people over the years, which is just test it. When in doubt, run an A/B test. And good luck. Thanks for having me. It was a pleasure to be here.
Thank you so much for everyone watching, and see you again next time.